to the Old Time Gospel Hour on Facebook Live Sunday evening program. Good evening, little cousin T. Noria Gayfield, Sister Brenda Page. Good evening, Brother Evester, Sister Tippy Floyd. Good evening, Sister Beverly Fuller. Good evening. Good evening, Brother Walter and Sister Audrey Griffin, Sister Kayla Lane. Good evening, Sister Denise Minor. Good evening. Good evening. Good. Thank you, little cousin. Thank you, T. Thank you. Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the Old Time Gospel Hour. Good evening. Good evening. Also, good evening to the followers of the Old Time Gospel Hour and our YouTube listeners, Sister Gloria Arrington, Sylvester Willila, Annie Rice, Brother Brian, Sister Vanessa Tate, Pastor Hubbard, Brother Terrell Lane, Brother Robert, Sister Gail Buchanan. Good evening, Sister Juanice Mays. Good evening, Sister Theon Jones, Sister Rosalind Moore, Sister Stacy Gibbs. Good evening, Sister Yvonne Ford. Good evening, Sister Beverly Brown. Good evening, Brother Henry Mason. Good evening, Brother Ron and Sister Brenda McGee. Good evening. Good evening, good evening. Good evening. Good evening, Sister Gloretha Willis. Good evening, Sister Gloretha. Good evening, good evening. Good evening, Big Cousin Alice Gayfield. Good evening, Sister Margaret Roberts. Good evening, good evening. Thank you, Sister Margaret. Thank you. Good evening, good evening. Good evening, good evening. Sister LeVan Redden Adams. Good evening, little cousin Michael Gayfield. Good evening. Good evening, good evening. evening, Sister Jackie Little. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Old Time Gospel Hour Facebook Live Sunday evening program. Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone is feeling well this morning. Sorry we didn't have a live program this morning. I had a little family emergency. But we are here this evening. It is so good to see everyone this evening. Amen. We had a change in the weather. Oh my goodness, a 40 degree difference. The other day it was just 2 or 3 days ago, 82 and in the 70s, and now it is in the 40s. Oh, it's a big difference, big change, a lot of wind. It feels like March outside. It doesn't feel like almost the middle of April. Amen. All right. But it's okay. We made it through the storms. So God blessed us that we made it through the storms and no damage or anything. And as far as I know that everybody is doing good. So amen. Good evening, Sister Jackie Little. Good evening. Big Sister Ruthie Williams. Good evening, Sister Edna Randall Lane. Good evening. All right, you just heard Revive Us Again, Junior Intermediate Choir of Rising Star. And our opening up song, Until I Found the Lord, was a congregation song, and I do not have who was leading that. That was at Circle of Light. Amen. Good evening, Sister Dale Brown. Good evening. Amen. All right, well, we are going to go ahead and get into this good gospel music. Amen.